Hello, everyone. This is the Forward Thinking Podcast with CS2. I'm Xander Broffel, Director of Marketing Operations, and joining me today is Grant Booth, Senior Salesforce Consultant for CS2. Hey, Grant, welcome. Thanks so much for joining.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So excited to have you be a part of the podcast. This is, I believe, your first time on this one. Awesome. How's the day going?
It's going pretty well. I've got plenty of things on my plate. Excited to dive back into some customer projects, but looking forward to this appearance and talking about this subject.
Yeah, it's a really important subject that we're going to be talking about today. It is actually going to be a two-part podcast where we are talking about tackling technical debt. Today, we're going to be focusing on the business side of things. How do we get this as a prioritized project? Because I think that's what probably the most people that are listening to, they all understand that they have technical debt, but they need to get it taken care of and they need to get it something that is going to be prioritized. So Grant, you've done a fantastic job on this with some clients, and I'm looking forward to some of the advice here. And then we will be doing a follow-up episode where we're actually going to go into some projects and really roll up our sleeves and get into some of the details, right?
That's right.
That's fantastic. But hey, before we jump into the topic at hand, this is the first time that you're on the podcast. I know our listeners always love to get to know who is joining us. So just let us know, how did you get started in Salesforce consulting?
Absolutely. So I started off my career in tech back at Marketo Support, 10 years ago, something along those lines, maybe a little more. And I became a specialist in the Salesforce integration there. I got Salesforce certified. I worked on their premier support team with major customers being their named support engineer, their go-to person who would jump in and tackle whatever issues, technical or kind of more business side that they might be facing, and just make sure that they were really empowered to use Marketo to the best of its abilities. And from there, I moved into Marketo administration and then into Salesforce administration and stuck with that for quite a while, and then came here to CS2.
Awesome. What drew you to CS2? How did you kind of
Allison,
get that on your radar?
I was excited to work with Allison again. Absolutely. That was a critical factor for me. And I think I was also looking forward to expanding my knowledge with a bigger tool stack. I think I'd gotten maybe a little bit complacent in having been in-house for going on 5 years at the time, and I was excited for a new challenge.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you get to see so many different environments. You see more than I do. I can only imagine how you keep everything straight, but that's awesome. Very good. Well, Grant, welcome. It's fun. It's fun having that support background. That's something that I have as well. I wasn't working in MarTech. I was working more on the data backup side of business. But working support, you see all of the good and the bad of applications. So I know it's been really helpful to have you on the team when there's a really detailed question and you can be like, well, I remember back in the day.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's still this way, but at least this is how it did work.
This one annoying case that wouldn't die.
Exactly.
Still up there.
Awesome. Yep. Fantastic. So let's jump into the topic at hand. Again, today we are talking about technical debt. Before we, get too much into the weeds, give us just an overview. How do you define technical debt?
So I would define technical debt as being architecture in your software stack in your business environment that is either no longer optimized or no longer necessary and is hindering future growth.
Excellent. And is that anywhere?
Just about, yeah. I mean, I obviously, in my focus on things, I'm focused on Salesforce, especially. But obviously, Salesforce connects into all sorts of places, and often the problems that you're seeing arise in Salesforce could very well be rooted in another system. And fixing those problems means working across teams in multiple systems, clarifying how things are getting used, and
For
making sure
sure.
that it can be changed or turned off and so on.
Excellent. Excellent. So, I think that we all face technical debt no matter how large or small you are. I'm working with a
Mm-hmm.
client right now. It's kind of like fresh and new, but they still have technical debt. It might just be smaller than, an organization that's been using their Salesforce instance for, call it 5-10 years. But everybody's going to face it in some capacity. How have you seen it like impact our clients? Do you have any examples of just like where it's been really bad?
Yes.
Without giving names,
Without
obviously,
giving
but just
names,
some
no.
scenarios that we might all be familiar with.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not going to do any name dropping. Not airing anybody's dirty laundry. And the fact is, you may be looking over your Salesforce environment or your Marketo environment or a variety as they're hooked together, and be thinking, "Wow, this is awful. We must be so much worse than everybody else." Odds are, I mean, you might be. Odds are it's actually pretty standard though, because it's just an inevitable part of having an old organization. Um, old like Salesforce instance, and it's unavoidable. And it doesn't necessarily mean that things were done wrong. It could
Mm,
just mean that it was done with the best tools available at the time, and now those tools have changed. It could be that it was done in a way that worked great for your organization given the size it was at the time. I mean, running an organization of 10 people is much different from running an organization of 1,000 people,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And there's processes, automation, structures that work great for a small team that are going to start falling apart with a big team. And you have to redesign and rework those, and it's a job. And
absolutely.
sometimes that old stuff gets in the way.
Yeah,
Often the old stuff gets in the way.
oftentimes it does. If I'm a listener that's like not in the weeds, right?
Hmm.
I'm not going into logs. I'm not seeing specific error messages, but I'm trying to figure out like how is this actually impacting me? Why is it a big deal? Are there any key processes that you've seen break down because of technical debt?
Sometimes, well, really any project that involves adding new fields, which is like every project, right? Um,
Yep.
and it all depends, right? It depends. But there are, of course, hard limits in Salesforce. Like there's the kind of gradual changes that can accumulate over time and start to slow things down and get in the way. But then Salesforce and most systems will have hard limits of some kind. So they might have a limit on the number of custom fields, for example, that are not part of an installed package.
Mm,
And when you reach that limit, it won't let you create new ones.
sure.
And so you have to go through and identify ones that you can delete. And deleting a field sounds really simple on the surface, but in practice can be pretty difficult.
And why
So,
is that?
for example, well, suppose you started off with a small org and you just made everybody a system admin
Oof.
because there were only like 5 of you.
Yep.
And none of you really knew how to use Salesforce anyways. You were flying by the seat of your pants, so to speak. And so you just let everybody have free reign, and that worked fine at the time. You're a small growing business. You needed that flexibility, that ability to move fast was absolutely critical.
Sure.
Flash forward a few years, you get funded. You're a 100-person company. Everybody's still a system admin. If somebody looks for a field and doesn't find what they're looking for, but maybe they were searching for like a different word that means the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And then they just create a new field. They're like, oh, I guess this doesn't exist. I'll just make it. Uh, you pretty quickly start to have a accumulation of things that were meant to do the same thing, and odds are maybe none of them actually have the right data in them,
Yes.
or one of them does but the others don't, and then somebody in finance is pulling it onto a report when it doesn't do what they
Expect it to.
thought it does. And then pretty soon you have a business critical problem happening.
Absolutely. I know I was working with a client, and their technical debt problem was we kept on running into sync issues. And so, we would upload a list from within Pardot, and that process would take hours. I'm talking like 3 hours to upload 100 people into the
Yeah,
system, because every time that they went to go sync over into Salesforce, they would fail. So then you'd have to like take
right.
the difference and then bring those people in, and then it would fail, and then bring the difference in, and it was painful. And their marketing ops team was spending their entire time just doing list uploads. So, we'll go
Right.
into some of the details on how we can clean that up, but ultimately, through some partnerships, we were working with the client and another agency who was working like kind of through cleaning this up for them. And ultimately we got all of the process builders moved into flows, and then those errors
Nice.
really started to go away. And now you're using the system how you were designing, or how you were intending on using it. Of, I want to do a list upload of 100 people, and it takes me 5 minutes, not 3 hours.
Right. And that's the gist of the project that I've done for some of our clients now.
Cool.
And that is one of the most frustrating things as an admin that you can run into, is like you're trying to complete a project and you need to, say, mass update all of your existing opportunities with this new field that was added so that it makes
Yeah,
sense historically. Uh, but then if you try to update more than 2 opportunities at a time, it
for
fails.
sure.
Because if an operation is taking too long in Salesforce, then it will block it from happening and roll back your changes. And then you have to keep trying smaller and smaller sizes. And it's just a really frustrating experience. And it can make things take 2, 3, 4 times as long as you might expect. And it really becomes a
Yeah,
time suck, not just for Salesforce admins,
for
but
other
for other
teams as
teams.
well. So
And
go ahead.
I was just going to add that that same effect, it doesn't just hit you as a like as an admin who, or an ops person who's doing imports, but it also impacts your
Mm.
integrations and can mean things are just flat out failing, and you might not even realize it if you're ignoring the alerts going to whatever inbox is associated with that
Yeah.
user. So it could very well mean the data just isn't syncing over to Salesforce at all in some cases, because it fails when it tries.
And I think that that's the crux of the conversation that we want to have today. Because, at the end of the day, I think that all admins are feeling this pain. All people who are kind of working within the systems are feeling this pain. But I know for me, it was
Mm-hmm.
really difficult to try when I was in house to get it prioritized, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're building your business
Right.
case saying it's costing me 3 hours every time that I do a list upload, a CFO who's trying to figure out like where do we prioritize our time and energy isn't going to look at saving you, an individual person, 3 hours a day, or whatever that time savings might be. That's a tough sell. But there are some like very large problems that can impact customer experience. We kind of talk about this with the revenue growth architecture, right? All of this technical debt is surrounding building out the right customer experience, building out the right processes, so that way we make sure that all of our sales transactions are smooth and easy to execute, ultimately bringing in more revenue. So if you could help us understand, Grant, like what are some key areas that we can leverage to try and build that business case to get something like this prioritized?
Well, as with any project, if you don't have some analytics to back up its results, then it's pretty tough to justify the time spent on it and the resources
Yeah.
dedicated to it, right? And for a lot of companies, they might not have, uh, especially smaller companies, you might not have like an advanced admin or a developer in house. And especially if you have, say, some old Apex code or a lot of old Apex code, and you don't have a developer on your like business applications or RevOps team to actually look into that and try to reverse engineer what's going on and update it and replace it, then it'll really it could mean that you have to go to, say, an agency or an outside contractor of some kind to actually do
Hmm.
that work. And if you're doing that, then you really need to find a way to justify it and make sure that whoever's the decision maker that gets the say on that budget believes that it's worth it, and that you can show them the value after the
Yeah.
fact as well. And so, in my own experience as an admin, we all knew it was a problem, and every admin team knows that it's a problem. Old fields, old automation, you start hitting limits, things are slow, there's errors that pop up, and you know that it's like, you just feel in your soul that there's like some sort of death by a thousand cuts situation happening,
Yes.
right? um, but how do you show that, and how do you communicate it to somebody who doesn't know the tool? And that's where it gets hard. And I think it's good to meet with your team and brainstorm some ways that you could actually measure that impact. So a key one that I focused on was the time necessary to do an upload.
Okay.
Uh, so as I went through and was overhauling automation for a customer, replacing old automation, I won't really dive into the details of what we replaced and why right now. We'll save that for another time. But replacing old automation with newer, properly architected, and more efficiently designed automation using the newer tools in Salesforce. I first backed up their Salesforce instance to a developer
Okay.
sandbox. And I had one developer sandbox that I left untouched. So a copy of their Salesforce that I just didn't actually change anything in. And then I made another developer sandbox, another copy that I was actually doing my work in and staging things in, and preparing it to move into production from there. But that gave me a like snapshot in time of what the Salesforce instance was like
Yeah.
before I started, that I could then compare to afterwards. And I ran test imports.
Okay.
I I built test data, set up some spreadsheets, say to import 50 opportunities or 25 opportunities, something like that. If I tried to do more, it would fail. So,
It's
you know,
good. I mean, it's a part of the
um,
benchmark, right? It's a part of saying this is my baseline and this is
yeah,
what we're going to improve.
right. And this is something. And there was other analysis I did that you need a little bit more uh, specialization in, but for this particular test, I just did imports of that test data. I'd import it, run a timer on my cell phone to see how long it took, delete the data, import it again. I did that like 5 times so that I'd have a somewhat reliable average to work with. Um, yeah, statisticians out there might disagree
With you.
with the accuracy of that, but but I wasn't going to spend all day
No,
testing,
no,
right?
absolutely.
um, and it was certainly enough to show, for example, like for one customer, we decreased the time that it took to, say, import 200 leads by 60%.
Amazing.
So able to show on, say, a slide that could be presented to leadership, we decreased the time that it took to insert data by 60%.
And did you relate that to any like business outcomes or anything like that?
I think so. There's a number of different ways that can actually tie into your business. From a user experience, it's everything was running slower and now it's running faster. Especially if you're an admin and you're actually doing these big imports, where those inefficiencies scale up
Yeah.
really fast, and you really feel it when you're, say, importing thousands of records or updating thousands of records, as opposed to your day-to-day Salesforce user who's just updating like one record at a time. They don't
Sure.
really feel that so much. Um, the the biggest business case is if you were hitting errors in Salesforce, CPU limit errors that were due to all that old inefficient automation. And that it doesn't just mean that your inbox is getting harassed with alerts. It means that data is failing. For example, leads might be failing to have their status updated from something, engaged to marketing qualified or something like that. kind of a big deal for your
Absolutely.
business. How much money is lost as a result? Well, you can't really measure that.
Sure.
Um, with the right resources in a study, maybe somebody could
You could
speculate
speculate
to some
it,
degree.
maybe
But
utilizing like your average
yeah,
conversion rates or things like that you could ultimately kind of get to a business case. Um, but I like that. I
right.
mean, at the end of the day, yes, it is the admin that's getting impacted the most from a time perspective. But you have a lot of people that are relying on you, right? Like when you're spending 3 hours
Right.
doing a list upload, you have a marketer who has already told the field, hey, this event happened, your 50 leads are going to show up in your queue, you have the salesperson who's ready to go, ready to start doing outbound against that list, they're asking the marketer's asking you, you are soaking up time from all of those people. It's not
Yeah.
just the single admin. And I think painting that story
Hmm.
can really help to build the business case. I kind of gave the example of a CFO may not necessarily see saving 3 hours for a single person as a time savings and worth the investment. But if they are looking at it at a grander scale and they're saying,
Hmm.
well, there's a bunch of salespeople that are blocked, there's a marketer that's blocked, there's this that's blocked, that's point A. Point B is it's 3 hours that you're not working on actual move the needle projects. A list upload is the thing that should be like,
Hmm.
I start my day, I do a quick list upload, and now I'm going and improving the business. And instead, you're spending your day running the
Right.
business.
Right. It's not what admins sign
Right.
up to do, right? You don't sign up to be waiting for a
No,
spreadsheet to import all
no,
day.
no, exactly.
It wasn't. I hope it wasn't why you sought the job.
And maybe it's the stepping stone. I definitely have worked with some folks that
Yeah. Yeah.
that
No.
that is the job, and that's okay. But
Yeah.
what we want to be doing is providing even more value to the business, and that's an opportunity cost that we are taking when there's something like this.
Right. And hopefully, if you've got the good fortune of having an ops intern, you are assigning them more interesting projects and helping them to grow in their careers. They're just handing off list imports to them and
Absolutely.
giving them the
Yes,
grunt work.
100%. You had also mentioned the sync issues, and now that can really be a business case to build. If you have sync issues that are impacting things like request to demo or contact sales
Hmm.
requests, and those are the things that convert the highest for most organizations. I don't know. Did you have any examples
Hmm.
of those that you worked on yet?
There, it's most likely to become an issue when you're dealing with large
Okay.
numbers, and that could mean maybe you did an email campaign that's promoting a particular asset, and then you have a lot of traffic going to that asset at the same
Sure.
time, right? And then maybe your marketing automation platform is trying to sync all those updates into Salesforce at the same time. And a well designed integration is going to do those in batches. It's going to send over like 200 updates at a time or insert 200 records at a time over to Salesforce. Uh, and that's where you're most likely to encounter errors is when it's being done at scale. List imports
Yep.
are a really common one. Suppose you have a ton of people who scanned in at your booth at a trade show, and you're now trying to hand those people off to sales, and so you're importing a list of hundreds of people. Uh, that's where it's likely to encounter errors, and it could mean that those people don't actually get handed over to sales the way that you were
For sure.
expecting them to
Yeah.
because it failed to sync.
Yeah, nothing is, I mean, we should all be checking our work after we do it, right? We do a list upload, go into
Yes.
Salesforce, check, make sure that everybody's in your campaign. But nothing is worse than I only got 20 of my 200 and now I have to, get that
Yeah.
get that trouble shot throughout. Definitely frustrating. And I think I
Right.
here's an honest question for you. Would you consider technical debt something like fields that have like restricted pick list values and you have values on the Salesforce side that don't match what your marketing automation platform has, and then that's causing an issue? Or would you say that that's something slightly different?
Hmm. Um, I feel like that's more of a like
Okay.
architecture flaw
Yeah.
question. I mean, certainly it relates. And there's, I mean, in any project, there's going to be like little, I mean, it's a little
Right.
bug that pops up, right? And there's an inevitable amount of going back and fixing little bugs in um, like in a
Sure,
flexible manner.
sure. Yeah, I just
That is an endless project, and if it gets put off,
it
then it
accumulates, and
accumulates.
that to me is where I'm like, oh, sometimes it's like the small things that are technical debt if you're not paying that cost, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Absolutely. So Grant, we understand why it needs to be prioritized. We've gotten some examples of how it can be prioritized. One of the questions that I have for you is, how can we prevent it from happening in the first place? Are there things that we can do today, even if this is not a prioritized project, that we can do to at least make it not as bad?
Absolutely. I think the number one thing that comes to mind for me is having a really clear change management process. And that's something that can take just time for your admins to put together. Having, I think, a stable admin team is really
That
important.
helps.
For those of you who are dealing with an unstable admin team, you're probably like, oh, gee, yeah, you think, Grant? Thanks. Great advice there. Yeah, we'll get on that. But keep your admins happy. Don't let them leave. um, I think taking the time to document and set up what that change management process looks like and what kind of testing is expected for changes, where you draw the line between what qualifies as like a major change that needs, say, extensive testing in sandbox versus a small change that can move forward with like minimal testing. That's something that takes some time to develop, but I do recommend that you document and clarify what that process is. And for the other ops people who are working with your admins, make sure that that's visible to them and that people know it. Um, I think that learning and development for your admin team is critical as well. Um, I think sometimes the biggest challenge to cleaning up technical debt is the know-how for how to use the new tools or how to be able to reverse engineer what was already there and implement something new, and making sure that your admins are able to prioritize the time and have the resources, maybe training available to, for example, learn how to use Salesforce flows and build them well, so that you can stop using Process Builder.
Yeah, I mean,
People who've been doing this work for a while might be, you're comfortable using the old tool, you feel like you've mastered it, you know how to do it well, and you might be hesitant about taking on a somewhat complex and intimidating feature like Salesforce Flow, because there's a lot to it, and it can be a little
for
overwhelming when you're
sure. I
first
mean,
getting started.
you talk about that comfort, and I think I always laugh because, Salesforce has three major releases that they do every year. I think that's still the case, right? And they are like they're pretty massive. Like
Sounds right.
there are there are
Yeah.
a lot of pages of updates, and if you are an admin who has been comfortable using a tool, maybe learned a new tool, right? We migrated from workflows into process builder, now we're going to migrate from process builder into flows, or any of the other variety of tools. If you haven't had time to really absorb what is new in the system, you may be solving something that like your platform has solved for you, and as a result you are introducing additional risk and additional debt just to solve those kind of one-offs.
And there could absolutely be things that you assumed were just a necessary evil before, and you don't realize that there's now like a much cleaner, efficient
Yeah,
way of accomplishing the same goal,
yeah, absolutely.
with newer features.
I'm thinking about some of my experience with HubSpot recently, and I found out that they have kind of like this beta feature for trigger criteria, where you can actually trigger based on like field updates, and it works just slightly different than how you would normally have done it on the HubSpot side, but it can change
Mm.
entire processes. Or I think about like when Marketo introduced executable campaigns, we were able to like fundamentally
Yes.
change how we could architect within Marketo. And if you don't take time to be able to learn that, and you don't give your teams time to be enabled on that, you are losing out on so much potential, and so much potential to make things more efficient and effective, and just run
Hmm.
smoothly.
Absolutely. I mean, executable campaigns at Marketo are a great example. I'm glad you brought that up because it fixed the ops headache, or at least made it a lot better of
Yes.
managing the order of things. Because that was always a little bit of a challenge in Marketo, and a headache for admins trying to make sure that things actually happen in the right order. And that was just such a great tool. And I hope people
Yeah.
haven't been hesitant about trying it out. Try out executable
100%.
campaigns
I
if you're
know
working
all
in
of my
Marketo.
clients that I work on with those projects. They leave like loving it because it's what we've always wanted, and now we have the
Yeah.
ability to do it, you know.
Yep. And it can be scary trying out new features. It hasn't always been super
Mhm.
well tested when things get released, or to the degree to which you might hope for. Companies have made mistakes in the past when it comes to that, and so you have to exercise a degree of caution. Maybe try things out in a fairly isolated manner at first, to where if something is going wrong with it, it's not a super
Mhm.
business critical process. Um, but you've got to try it out.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Absolutely, you've
yeah,
got to learn
most
those new
definitely.
tools.
Fantastic. Um, is there anything else that you want to share in terms of metrics and measurement? We talked about reduction in processing time. Anything else that you can think of, um, that would be helpful for the teams as they are trying to escalate this up?
I would recommend brainstorming with your team. Anything that can actually be brought into table form. And if you can bring something into table form, then you can bring it into
Yeah.
a bar graph form, right? And there's nothing that leadership loves more than a good bar graph, uh,
Yes.
than a good chart, right? And that could mean exploring sync logs or error logs. Um, with the last customer I did this project with, we didn't have access to Marketo with them, and so I couldn't. Like, I would have loved to have gotten in there and exported those error logs and seen if I could actually um, measure the difference in like which errors were
Yeah.
happening and how frequently, and be able to put that out with the percentage and get it on a before versus after comparison. But really explore anywhere that you think you can actually export data and
For
compare
sure.
before
For
versus
sure.
after.
I know there's a graphic that we use often that's just like it's a baseline graphic, but it's just also showing the processing time of a process builder versus a before save flow.
Hmm.
And anytime that I show that to a client, like it just clicks right away, like, oh, I see the big difference there.
Yeah.
And so if you can, first of all, like you could use that, and maybe we can share a link to that file.
Hmm.
um but what we could but
Absolutely.
what we could also say is I've seen some great visuals from you in those projects, and we'll go through that on our next podcast, go into a little bit more detail. But being able to show that before and after, and you have, the giant bar graph of how long it took before down to this is where we're at in current
Hmm.
state. I mean, that's something that can absolutely sell. So, the Mops
Hmm.
folks, we don't often get the opportunity to maybe deliver feedback like this about what's going on in the organization. But the more that we can
Hmm.
visualize it and make it actionable, the better.
Absolutely. It pays to take the time
For
to run
sure.
through and put that data together. It one of my most frustrating points as an admin was just showing that justification in order to get the resources and time dedicated to
Yeah,
fixing what we all knew the problem was. Uh, but even just putting together that data can take some time, and that's where it can be a struggle. So it like, get a meeting on the books with your admin team, and do that brainstorm to think through, like, how can we actually measure this. Take the time to do some research about how you can measure it. It'll really pay to show
absolutely.
the difference.
Fantastic. Um, Grant, any closing thoughts that you may want to share with the team on this side of the house of, getting the projects prioritized, how we got here, anything like that?
Just a reminder to get those graphs together. Anything that you can get into a table, get it into a table, and then make good use of color. Try to keep the graphic as like simple, and maybe simple is the wrong word, but like cut to the chase. Like, what is the 3 key metrics that really show the change in what this means for integrations or your admin team, as far as reduction in wasted time or a reduction in errors occurring, like whatever it is. Like, stay on message with it. Don't dive too much into the technical detail, but have that there and ready to justify your work.
Awesome. Grant, thank you so much for your time here. If there was like one thing that you've seen people get wrong when it comes to technical debt, anything in mind?
Load testing. When you're doing a change, do load testing. Not gonna drop any names here, of course, but I can think of one organization from the past where they had a bunch of old Apex code. Their admin was leaving. They wanted to clean up all of this Apex code that they'd written in Salesforce, and so they kind of rebuilt it all as flows in like kind of a fast manner on their way out, because they didn't want whoever came next to be stuck with their old code. Very noble cause, absolutely supportive, but they didn't do load testing. And then there were a number of things that were broken as a result of that, where the process worked when there was, say, one lead or one opportunity running through it, but then it broke down when there were multiple records running through it together. Salesforce has a lot of nuance for how it handles multiple records being part of the same change. So always do load testing.
Great idea. And you can utilize that in whatever tool that you're doing, right? You're building out lists to do an upload. You can do that in marketing automation platforms to test your changes. You can do that in Salesforce. Mm-hmm. Delete the records after you've gone through and finished it up, especially on the Marketo side, where you may not be operating out of a sandbox, maybe a little bit more straightforward to do in a developer sandbox, but always having that opportunity is key.
Right.
Awesome. Grant,
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time. And thank you to everybody who has listened to the episode. If you found this episode useful, please give us a like. Please give us a review if you're listening to it on a podcast service. We really do appreciate it. This has been the Forward Thinking Podcast. Have a great day.